The steppe winds carried with them the thunder of hooves, a sound that grew louder before an enemy could even see where it came from. The Mongol warriors were not bound by walls or fields. Their battlefield was endless grassland, their strength rooted in the horse beneath them. Each man rode as though born in the saddle, moving with a speed and precision that no foot soldier could ever match. Their bows bent with deadly power, arrows finding targets long before the clash of steel. The Mongols never fought by chance. Their campaigns were calculated storms. Scouts rode far ahead, spreading across the land like shadows, mapping rivers, mountains, and strongholds. Messages traveled across vast distances through a relay of riders, ensuring that every unit moved as one. When the time came to strike, it seemed as if an entire horizon erupted into an army, disciplined yet merciless. They fought not in rigid formations, but with fluid maneuvers, sweeping across fields like waves of fire. Feigned retreats lured enemies into chaos, only for Mongol riders to circle back and cut them down. No fortress was safe. Engineers, often taken from conquered peoples, dragged siege machines across deserts and steppes, breaking gates that once seemed unbreakable. Cities that resisted too long faced fire and ruin, left as warnings to others. Their conquest was not only of land, but of fear. Word spread faster than their riders, carried by survivors who whispered of massacres and total destruction. Kingdoms surrendered without battle, choosing submission over annihilation. In the east, they broke the armies of China. In the west, they swept through the Islamic world and into Europe, leaving princes and kings trembling. The Mongol conquests were not battles alone, but an unstoppable tide reshaping continents. Their war was fought with speed, terror, and an iron discipline that made them more than warriors. They were a force of nature, riding with the storm, leaving behind a world forever changed. The heart of Mongol warfare lay in their mastery of mobility, a weapon as sharp as any sword. From childhood, Mongol boys learned to ride horses before they could walk confidently. The steppe was their home, and the horse was their lifeline. Fourth, this lifelong bond created warriors who could remain in the saddle for days, covering immense distances that baffled their enemies. A Mongol army could ride hundreds of kilometers in a single campaign, striking where no one thought they could appear on their day. Their speed was not just about moving quickly. It was about controlling the tempo of war. By the time an opponent gathered their forces, the Mongols had already struck, withdrawn, and circled back to strike again. Central to this dominance was their horseback archery. The composite bow, made from wood, horn, and sinew, was small enough to be used effectively from horseback, yet powerful enough to pierce armor at great range. A skilled Mongol archer could release arrows while galloping at full speed, turning their entire army into a moving storm of deadly shafts. Unlike many armies that relied on hand-to-hand combat, the Mongols excelled at keeping their distance, harassing their foes until the enemy broke formation. This constant pressure exhausted both men and animals, while Mongol horses, hardy and trained for endurance, seemed tireless. One of their most devastating tactics was the feigned retreat. To an unsuspecting commander, it looked like a chance for victory, the enemy breaking and running. But this was a trap. The Mongols would scatter as if defeated, drawing their pursuers into a reckless chase. Once the enemy had stretched their lines and lost cohesion, the riders would wheel around in perfect coordination, raining arrows into the disorganized mass. Panic followed, and what began as pursuit ended in massacre. Time after time, this tactic shattered armies larger than the Mongols themselves. Psychological warfare was another weapon sharpened by speed and cunning. The Mongols understood the power of fear. They spread terror deliberately, ensuring that tales of their brutality reached distant lands before their armies did. Cities that resisted too long were often destroyed entirely, men slaughtered, women and children taken, buildings razed to the ground. Survivors were left alive only to carry the horror to others. This ruthless reputation broke the will of many rulers before a single arrow was fired. Entire towns surrendered upon hearing that the Mongols were near, preferring submission over annihilation. Even the appearance of the Mongols on the battlefield was calculated to terrify. Moving in disciplined formations, their banners fluttering across the steppe, they seemed less like men and more like a tide of destruction. Their movements were coordinated with signal flags, drums, and messengers, creating the illusion of a force larger than it really was. Enemies often believed they faced overwhelming numbers, when in truth they were facing a fraction of their own strength, wielded with unmatched efficiency. Mobility, deception, and fear worked together as parts of a single machine. No enemy could rest, no line could hold, and no retreat was safe once the Mongols set their eyes on conquest. Armies accustomed to slow marches and rigid formations found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. They could not match the stamina of Mongol horses, the precision of Mongol archery, or the cunning of Mongol commanders. It was this blend of endurance, tactical brilliance, and psychological domination that made the Mongols seem unstoppable. In war, numbers alone do not guarantee victory. The Mongols proved that a smaller, faster, more disciplined force could dismantle kingdoms and empires many times their size. Their mastery of mobility and the calculated use of terror reshaped the art of war, leaving scars across continents and lessons that generals would study for centuries to come. Fortresses and walled cities were once thought to be shields against invading armies. For centuries, rulers built massive stone defenses, confident that an enemy on horseback could never breach their walls. Yet the Mongols shattered this belief by mastering siege warfare, combining their own relentless discipline with the knowledge of captured engineers. What began as a nomadic cavalry force evolved into a war machine capable of leveling the strongest fortifications. No place was safe, not behind gates, not on mountaintops, not even within the deepest citadel. The Mongols had no shame in adopting the skills of others. Wherever they went, they absorbed knowledge from the people they conquered. In China, they captured and employed skilled artisans and engineers who understood the construction and operation of massive siege engines. In Persia and the Islamic world, they learned advanced methods of mining under walls and building towers for archers. Every captured mine became a tool for further conquest. Rather than relying solely on horsemen, the Mongols began carrying with them entire corps of specialists capable of building engines of destruction in record time. Siege towers, catapults, mangonels, and trebuchets became part of their arsenal. These machines hurled massive stones that could shatter walls or flaming projectiles that set entire cities ablaze. When one fortress resisted too long, the Mongols brought up rams to batter gates until they splintered. Their engineers even used early forms of gunpowder weapons learned from the Chinese, creating fearsome explosions that stunned defenders. The once mobile, hit-and-run horsemen had now learned to combine speed in the open field with crushing power at the gates of cities. But technology was not the only factor. Organization made these sieges terrifyingly effective. The Mongols approached each fortress systematically. Scouts mapped out defenses. Supply lines ensured their armies could wait out defenders as long as needed. They constructed circumvallation walls around besieged cities, cutting off food and reinforcements. Trapped inside, civilians starved while the Mongols patiently prepared their assault. Time itself became a weapon, grinding down the will of those who resisted. So if walls fell, the consequences were dire. The Mongols made examples of cities that resisted, slaughtering entire populations and leaving ruins as warnings to others. Samarkand, Nishapur, and countless others became grim reminders of what defiance cost. On the other hand, those who surrendered quickly were often spared, absorbed into the Mongol system as subjects or conscripts. This ruthless policy created a chain reaction across empires. When word of destruction spread, many cities chose to submit without a fight. Siege warfare was not just physical, but psychological, crushing hope before the first stone was launched. The capture of Zhongdu in northern China demonstrated their devastating efficiency. The city's defenders believed their high walls and vast garrisons could withstand any enemy. The Mongols, however, brought massive siege engines and used relentless assaults to breach its defenses. Once inside, they unleashed slaughter on such a scale that it echoed across Asia, convincing other Chinese cities that resistance was futile. In the west, at the fortress of Alamut, famed for being nearly impregnable, Mongol engineers constructed massive siege machines that eventually forced the defenders to surrender. No fortress, no matter how legendary, could withstand the methodical destruction of the Mongol war machine. By integrating siege technology into their campaigns, the Mongols erased the line between steppe warfare and conventional siegecraft. They proved adaptable, unbound by tradition, willing to use any weapon that served their purpose. Horseback archery allowed them to dominate in open fields, but siege machines ensured no enemy could hide behind walls. This combination made their conquests unstoppable, stretching from the cities of China to the castles of Eastern Europe. The lesson was clear. Walls were no longer an ultimate defense. The Mongols had transformed mobility into total warfare, and with engineers at their side, they ensured that even the strongest fortresses crumbled before them. Their integration of siege technology showed that conquest was not only about speed and skill on horseback, but also about innovation, patience, and the willingness to turn an enemy's strength into a weakness. The Mongol conquests were more than a chain of victories. They were a storm that swept across continents, leaving kingdoms trembling and empires shattered. With unmatched speed on the open steppe and relentless power at city gates, they proved that no army, no fortress, and no distance could guarantee safety. What began as a nomadic people on horseback became the architects of an empire stretching from the Pacific to the heart of Europe. Their warfare was not just about defeating enemies, it was about reshaping the world, carving fear into memory, and demonstrating that adaptability, discipline, and ruthlessness could topple even the mightiest of civilizations.